Hello there. On this episode of You're Towing What with What, I am here with a familiar face. This is the 2024 Lexus GX. You'll recall I had this exact vehicle a few weeks ago and then wasn't able to tow with it, and I had my NASA Mid-Atlantic season opener coming up at VIR. So I reached back out to Lexus and said, hey, could I just get that one back? And they said, sure. So we're back again with this earth-colored Lexus GX 550 Overtrail, and we are here towing my 20-foot aluminum enclosed trailer. Now, a lot of people are going to say, wow, this is a lot of trailer for this car, and you're kind of right. It's only a 112-inch wheelbase, but these are rated to tow just over 9,000 pounds. My trailer is nowhere near that. It's about 7,000 pounds all loaded up. So let's talk about a few things right off the bat that I don't especially like about this Lexus GX for the sake of towing, and then we'll get behind the wheel and just talk about how the whole thing pulls. So first things first, this is that Overtrail Plus trim. So what that means is you have a slightly softer suspension and you've got an all-terrain tire. So you can get these cars with highway tires. They would do a better job probably than these, but this is the package that we have. And a lot of people are gonna want this package. This is one I would want, frankly. So we're gonna talk about how this one is. All right, so a couple things here with the trailer hitch on the GX that I don't love. First thing is going to be the cover that you have here that has to come off. So this is a press fit cover, but there are some little plastic push pins that you need the key for the Lexus or a flathead screwdriver to remove. And what that means, they've got this hitch kind of tucked in for the sake of, you know, giving you a good departure angle off-roading, which is great. But this is a kind of thick double-walled hitch, and because of how they've got it all mounted here, the place where you put your hitch pin is fairly far out, which means your hitch itself is fairly far out, which means that you've got some issues here. You're gonna have to have really long safety chains. You can see mine are, you know, long enough to work with any other vehicle I've used to tow this trailer. I've used about 50 of them at this point, and they are not long enough to be crossed. So this is a safety concern. This is not the way to be doing this with your safety chains. The other thing that's a problem is that your wiring connectors, you've got both a 7-pin and a 4-pin, they're tucked up here under the bumper, and, you know, again, great for off-roading and departure angles, but because this forces your hitch to be so far back, your wiring is going to need to be longer as well. So everything here is just a little tricky. And then the other thing with this being double-walled, you need a long hitch pin, which at least Lexus did include in this particular vehicle. I think you can get it as part of a little $20 options pack. But this is a bit of a pain to deal with simply because of how far out your hitch itself is going to stick from the receiver. So that is that. It is, I know, quite noisy here. So let's get the car loaded up and get on the road and talk all about how this thing tows. Well, it is the end of my weekend at VIR, and it's now time for the 4-hour tow home, and I'm not going to spend all 4 hours talking to all of you, but we are going to talk about towing with this GX. So first things first, like I said, Lexus has just over 9,000 pounds of tow rating on this thing. 9,063, I think, is the exact figure, and that's up from what they first announced it was going to be when these were launched to the press. Initially, they said it was going to be like 8,200 or something, and then they found another 800 pounds. And that was interesting because the Land Cruiser that this is a platform mate and body mate with is only rated for 6,000 pounds. So what did Lexus do to get another 3 out of it? That's a really big increase. Well, first things first is the drivetrain. So the Land Cruiser is going to use the same 2.4-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder with hybrid setup that you get in most versions of the Tacoma and some versions of the upcoming 4Runner. And it's a fine drivetrain. I have a whole video on the Land Cruiser, but you're not going to get the most towing capability out of that. Lexus, by comparison, went for the 3.4-liter twin-turbo V6 that you find in a lot of the Tundras and the Lexus LX 600 and a few other vehicles. So by default, you're getting more power, more torque, and you don't have a hybrid system. Now, the thing with the hybrid system that you would think about is when the hybrid battery depletes, how much power and torque can the rest of the system put out on its own? So that, if you're pulling a heavy trailer up a mountain, for example, that's going to limit some of your towing capability because you can't rely on the hybrid system to have a battery that will last a really long mountain pass necessarily. So there is one thing. The other thing is you have to think about overall payload and overall gross vehicle weight rating for the platform. So again, going back to the Land Cruiser, that's going to have more weight taken out of that overall capability because you've got a little more weight from the hybrid system. Now, when you consider the extra weight of 2 more cylinders up front and, you know, the turbos and all that, it maybe isn't such a big weight difference overall, but it's still something to consider. The other thing that Lexus did is they've got bigger differentials. So the casings are larger. It's, I think, 9.2 inches versus 8.5, or it's 9.5 versus 8.2. Either way, it's a bigger differential housing, which means they can get, I think, either another clutch in there or bigger, stronger gearing or whatever. Point being, they've got stronger axles and axle gearing in the GX versus the Cruiser. So that is something else that is going to be a difference. And then you've got a different suspension setup. Now, I'm in the Overtrail Plus, which is going to have that cross-linked hydraulic suspension system. Not all GXs get that, but in this case, we've got it. This also has adaptive variable suspension. So the suspension is tuned differently in all of the GXs versus the Land Cruiser. And in this case, I've got that XREAS, and it's electronically controlled or assisted in this case. So that is all collectively going to combine to give you that extra tow rating. And Toyota and Lexus are using the SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, J2807 test, which is a pretty standardized test at this point across the industry. Anyone doing a tow rating, that is the one where the SAE dictates you must do all of these very hard things out west in very hot temperatures, at the Davis Dam, pulling up steep inclines with the AC on, keeping a consistent temperature and never falling below the speed, and with your pants on your head in reverse, with something on fire outside. I don't know, but it's a big, difficult test. So point being, I think Lexus announced this GX and said, oh, 8200 is what we think it's going to do. They went and did the test and actually found they could certify it a little bit higher. Now, the reason I'm going so deep into this is because I have a point. The wheelbase of this is only 112.2 inches. That is short. That is short for something that is rated to tow 9,000 pounds. Because to get 9,000 pounds of stuff behind you, you're going to be looking at a pretty large trailer with pretty beefy axles that can handle, 6,000 or 7,000 pounds of stuff. The trailer at minimum is going to be 2,000 to 2,500 of that. So this is where my race car trailer comes in. My total load back there between trailer, car, gear, parts, you name it, is 7,000 pounds or just a bit shy. And the trailer itself is a 20-foot aluminum enclosed trailer with a 4-foot V-nose, and it is something that I have pulled with a lot of different vehicles, including the prior generation Lexus LX and Toyota Land Cruiser. Those vehicles both did fine. This is also doing fine. And the key contributor there with the prior gen and with this gen is just the wheelbase. That is your single hard point that you're not going to change with any modifications that you do. And everyone at the racetrack was asking me over the past 3 days, how did that thing do towing that big trailer? Because this is a lot of trailer for this. I would not go an inch longer on the trailer length because it's a big sail in the wind. And then this is the part where I'm going to tell you that I'm doing this test in a way that I don't love. And I think if I had my hitch set up properly, this would be even better. So normally I would be towing with a weight distribution and sway control hitch setup, and I strongly recommend that for anyone pulling with an SUV like this or even a little bit longer. When I had my Porsche Cayenne, it was key to making that thing a very solid tow vehicle where otherwise it was a little bit overburdened. And in this case, part of that hitch that I have used and loved for many, many years, some stuff wore out and broke, and it didn't show up in time for this weekend. So it's all fine because I'm on prep, but regardless, the hitch, it's just a regular 2 5/16 inch ball with the trailer slammed on top of it. So I know my trailer tongue weight, I know it's about 10%, 11% of what we're towing, so everything is fine from a rated capacity standpoint, but this could be better. So take what I'm saying with a slight grain of salt, and I do think this would feel pretty rock solid with the rest of the setup back there. So then, how is it towing? Well, first things first, the 3.4 liter V6 is a gem. It has more than ample power and torque, whether you're down an on-ramp, leaving a toll booth, or just pulling out to pass somebody. It is totally ample. It's kind of fun. You can see how much boost it's putting out. You've got a gauge you can set up for that. But it doesn't really have to work super duper hard. When it does, it sounds pretty good. And then it's paired to a transmission that it normally has 10 gears, but in your tow haul mode locks you out to just the first 8. So it's always a little bit more in the power band. It's not going to try to lug the engine to get maximum fuel economy, because let's be real, that's not the point of towing a trailer. So The engine and transmission pairing is great. I mentioned the suspension in this thing being that cross-linked hydraulic setup, and that's really more intended for better off-road abilities, where it can kind of serve as a disconnecting sway bar equivalent and give you more articulation. However, my theory is that because you've got the suspension cross-linked and it's electronically controlled and it's paired to adaptive shocks, this thing has really good body control. So despite it being a bit of a busy experience right now, we are getting blown around a touch. It's a windy day here, but the Lexus is doing a really good job to fight everything it can, and it still is not that eventful for me as the driver. Do I know there's wind? Do I know I'm passing bigger vehicles when I do? Yeah, that's the part where sway control and weight distribution would help a pretty significant amount. However, despite the trailer being back there and, you know, being a bit of a sail in the wind and all that, I still have perfect control, and the Lexus itself is not pitching and heaving around. That's the part that makes you feel uncomfortable more than feeling the trailer move a little bit. I really think the entire suspension system is working nicely all together to make this feel as much of a non-event as it can be. And thankfully, even without the weight distribution on here, I've got plenty of weight on the front tires, and the steering feel is totally fine for what you would expect. Now, a couple things with this being the Overtrail, it does have the same high tow rating as most other GX 550s. There's one or two trims that have a touch less, but they're all rated fairly highly. Where this is going to have some slight disadvantages compared to the other trim levels of GX is with the suspension that I like so much and with the all-terrain tires that this comes on. The other GXs come with highway tires. They do not have the big squirmy tread blocks with big spaces in between them, and they are going to be a little more stable everywhere just by default. A lot of what I'm talking about with feeling things move around a little bit, a lot of that comes down to the tire more than my Hitch setup, but everything plays a part. The other thing with the Overtrail is that this suspension, being the most off-road focused, is also going to be a little bit softer. So yes, the shocks are variable based on your drive mode and all that, but the whole thing is going to be tuned to be a touch softer. So I think the better experience would be a different trim that does not have the Overtrail suspension and has the highway tires. Now, I get it. I think this looks really hot with the Overtrail setup, especially because the wheels and tires are very me. This is the one I would want. So it's doing fine. I'm not really that worried about it. And then the final piece with all this, of course, is stopping. And Lexus does include a trailer brake controller. It's down by your knee. It's a little out of the way, but you know, you can access it pretty quickly for an emergency stopping situation if you need to. Now, I mentioned my Hitch in particular, plus the way this receiver is all set up. Everything's a bit too long and my cables are all a bit too short. So I am using my Takancha Prodigy trailer brake controller because it gives an extra big chunk of cable, so I'm not actually worrying about ripping the cord off of my trailer if I take a tight right turn. So I'm actually not using the Lexus's built-in controller. The Takancha is working just fine. So, you know, either way, but you're going to have to consider the length of your trailer wiring and your safety chains, or consider the length of your hitch, or both. So just a fun fact. Now, the other thing with braking in this truck is that when you lift off the throttle, it will kind of coast for a bit and then it will start applying the brakes for you. And what is interesting, driver inattention, okay, we'll come back to you. What is interesting about that behavior is that it makes perfect sense if you are driving a hybrid, because you're going to want regenerative braking to get some juice back into the battery, and that's a whole pretty flawless experience with every hybrid and EV that I've ever driven. What is interesting is that this GX is not a hybrid, but it still has the same behavior, but there's no benefit to doing it. And what is kind of irritating, frankly, is when you're towing, there's probably some times I just want the whole rig to freewheel for a minute. And if I lift and wait a couple seconds, it's gonna start braking for me. And that, you can watch with my Prodigy brake controller. It shows how much braking force is being applied, how much voltage. And it applies the trailer brakes and everything. So it's kind of interesting. So if you're going down a long hill and you don't want the brakes to just come on at random, you have to keep a light pressure on the throttle, or I suppose I could downshift and keep it in the revs, you know, where it won't want to brake on its own. Just kind of an interesting tidbit. It's odd behavior. I think Lexus has said that they're going to do a hybrid version of this eventually, which does make sense given you can get a hybrid Toyota Sequoia and Toyota Tundra, so that drivetrain does exist, but just interesting braking behavior, and I don't like it. What I don't like is it's unpredictable. That's the problem I have. If I knew every time it was going to come in, that would be different, but it's just kind of, it is what it is when it happens. So that is that, and then back to the transmission, because I mentioned lower gears. You do have a manual mode, and you do have paddle shifters on the steering wheel. You have paddle shifters on the steering wheel, so you can use those, you know, for grades if you really want. I'm going to get more into that later in the drive, where it'll be a little more helpful. But overall, this has been, you know, this has not been the best towing experience I've ever had with this trailer, and I've towed with a lot of different tow vehicles. But what I told everybody that asked me at the track this weekend was, you know, if this vehicle fits your life otherwise and you really love it, and I am one of those people where if I was looking for an SUV that could go off-road and had good looks and I thought was kind of cool, this would be on my short list. If that was what you were going for and you needed to pull a trailer 6-7 times a year like I do to go racing, or, you know, for some other hobby sort of interest, or working around the house, whatever, this will do it, and it will do it pretty well. This is not meant to be a towing machine first and foremost, but I think they've got enough capability baked in that it is safe. It is, you know, for most people doing most towing activities, it's going to be more than enough truck to do it. And you just have to be mindful of how you load everything. You've got to be careful with your overall weight and with your tongue weight and your, you know, payload and all that. But that's really any tow vehicle that's not like an F-350. And if you want to not think about these things, then yes, buy an F-350 to tow a Miata. But if you want to have something smaller that can do other things, that is okay enough at towing, this is one of those cars. And I would have full faith towing, you know, 1,000 miles at a time with this. It's doing good enough. I would absolutely want weight distribution and sway control, but that's kind of how I feel about literally any tow vehicle using a tag hitch, bumper pull hitch, whatever you want to call it, not a gooseneck. Anything pulling more than 50% of its rated capacity, I want weight distribution and sway control on. It just does better. It is proven. I have done it. Others have done it. So with all that, this would be a pretty good rig. And even with how I'm doing this right now and just kind of, you know, going for it, it's also, I am pleased enough to where I'm not nervous. I'm very confident in it, and I feel safe getting home. So kudos to Lexus. I think this is a really great package overall. You know, I've been kind of wishy-washy on the Land Cruiser as comparison, because I don't know if the Land Cruiser does the Land Cruiser thing as well as the GX does. And frankly, this V6 plus the overall higher capabilities of this with the extra tow rating really make me even more of a fan of the GX. And, you know, compared to the Land Cruiser, I know we go back to Land Cruiser over and over because these are really body doubles where one is, you know, I think doing it a little bit better overall. I vastly prefer the V6. It is doing a lovely job towing. I like it much more unloaded as well. And just the extra capability that you get out of this for the sake of towing. If you're like me and you need that capability, you know, 6,000 pounds for this trailer isn't going to cut it. And I don't love the hybrid system with the 4-cylinder in the Land Cruiser. This is a great package by comparison. It's not towing first. That's okay. A lot of us don't tow 20 weekends out of the year. If you do, you're not going to be buying a vehicle like this. You're going to be buying a bigger truck. So, you know, for what you're doing, just consider your needs. And I think this is a really compelling option. So just have weight distribution and sway control. That would make this, this is like a 7 out of 10 right now, and it would take it to like an 8.5. So I feel pretty confident. Now keep in mind, I'm in Virginia. I live in the East Coast. I go up and down this coast. I am not pulling mountain passes in Colorado. If you are, your experience might be a little bit different. So much like you need to consider everything about the load you're pulling, you need to consider where you're going with it as well. You may want a little bit more truck if you're out there. But I think for most people, in most places, doing most things, this is honestly a better tow rig than I thought it would be. I really don't love the way the hitch is set up. It's irritating. And I think the gas tank is too small. If you're doing long towing journeys, your fuel economy tanks, and it's just going to be more frequent fill-ups than a bigger vehicle with a bigger tank. Other than that, I like this. And part of it's just that I like the GX. So I'm glad the GX can do what I want it to do, because it's like I'm rooting for you and I just want you to succeed, and dang it, it is doing it enough that I'm happy with it. So anyway, I've had very poor sleep the last 3 days, and I've just spent 3 days in a race car, jumping over curbing, and I hope any and all of that made some semblance of sense. But thank you for coming along as always. Let me know what else you want me to tow with in particular. I've got plenty of opportunities coming up, and be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, turn on the bell, make sure you get all the notifications. We've got plenty of content coming up, and if you want to join a bunch of LGBT automotive enthusiasts and motorsports competitors, head over to outmotorsports.com. We have a regional program now with events popping up all over the country, plus our bigger national level events at racetracks and on the street wherever you are. So we'd love to be your new besties and get to know you over there. Until next time, stay safe, be well. See you again soon.